Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, inhumane, dirty and disease-ridden. Not my words, but the words used by officials to describe the conditions that migrants have been living under at an overcrowded processing centre just outside of the capital. The Home Office is now facing a judicial review, and I'll be discussing this developing crisis with our correspondent Simon Pusey and activist Sharifa Energy, who will be joining me in the studio. And as Nigeria seeks to increase foreign direct investment and development finance, cultivating existing partnerships with countries in Southeast Asia appears to be of particular importance to the government. Ambassador Akinremi Bolaji, the Director of Economic, Trade and Investment at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, will be joining me from Abuja to discuss this spurred interest. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. But first, let's start the show with a story that continues to make headlines here in the UK. The Home Office is facing a judicial review over conditions at a migrant processing centre in Kent. Council leaders from across the region have told the government they are at breaking point. Manston is meant to house a maximum of up to 1,600 people, but according to local MPs, about 4,000 unprocessed asylum seekers are currently residing there, in conditions that have been described as inhumane. Earlier in the week, the Prime Minister accepted that the system was broken, following remarks from the Home Secretary that said illegal immigration was out of control in Britain.
4,000 people at the Manston Air Force Base, massively overcrowded, all sorts of diseases breaking out. So, did the Home Secretary receive legal advice that she should move people out? Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman is very fond of reminding us that he used to be the former Director of Public Prosecutions, so he knows the government's policy on commenting on legal advice. But what I can say is a significant action that the Home Secretary has taken to fix the issue. Since September, 30 more hotels with 4,500 new beds, appointing a senior general to control the situation at Manston, and indeed increasing the number of staff there by almost a half, Mr. Speaker. These are significant steps to demonstrate that we are getting a grip of this system. But this is a serious and escalating problem. We will make sure that we control our borders, and we will always do it fairly and compassionately, because that's the right thing.
Well, earlier I spoke with our business correspondent Simon Pusey for more on this story. So the dust has settled on Rishi Sunak's premiership, and now, of course, the Home Office is under increased scrutiny from both sides of the House. Nobody is happy with the conditions that have been described at this Marston processing centre. Are they going to be able to tackle it?
Yeah, so there seems to be quite a few angles here for the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Obviously, she was fired or resigned under the last Prime Minister, Liz Truss, just a couple of weeks ago, and then was sort of airdropped back in with Rishi Sunak 6 days later, which raised a lot of eyebrows. And then you've got the situation with migrant boats crossing the Channel, and then, as you said, this processing centre and pictures from that and stories that are coming out that are just saying that it's unacceptable and that there is overcrowding there and the conditions are terrible. I think, to be fair to her, this is not really a problem that she's caused. She's only just come in as Home Secretary. There was Priti Patel before her, and then many others before Priti Patel. And also the issues of the migrant boats crossing the Channel are huge. Almost 40,000 people have crossed so far this year. That's in comparison to 28,000 in 2021 and 8,000 in 2020. So it's really growing fast. And people have been saying that, you know, this does need to be stopped, but it seems to have been pushed under the carpet a little bit with other news that we're seeing. We've obviously got the Ukraine war and then lots of elections here and the Queen and things like that. So, but it is a massive issue, and it's one that, yeah, she hasn't really had the time to tackle. I think things like the nature of the language that she's used in Parliament, calling it an invasion of people, is not helpful, really. It does come across as very aggressive. But what clearly needs to happen is that these boats need to be stopped in France. So we need to somehow work with the French government. So I think if Rishi Sunak and President Macron sat down, or their respective counterparts sat down and tried to come up with a way of, you know, maybe the UK send over some kind of police force there to try and work with the French to stop them, because obviously you get many deaths, of course, people dying in the Channel, and then the UK isn't really set up for housing these people. So that's the problem at this processing centre, was Suella Braverman saying, and probably rightly so, we just don't have the time or the resources to be able to put these people into hotels, which then cost taxpayer money.
People don't want these people in their local community. That's kind of the truth of the matter, isn't it?
Well, I think, it's hard, isn't it? Because you don't know who's coming over necessarily.
Albanians have been...
Yeah, they've been sort of singled out. I think
yeah.
you do get economic migrants. You do get people who are trying to escape terrible conditions in their home countries. So there are, of course, going to be people that have legitimate asylum claims. The problem is just the sheer scale at the moment. So I think for Suella Braverman, the problem is that there's the fact that she was fired for a national security breach, and the problem that she comes across as quite hard right on this issue. Referring to them as an invasion isn't really very helpful, but you can also see it on the other side of it, saying that they're just the sheer scale of the challenge facing the government at the moment. So they need to come up with some kind of plan that really isn't too. And they're talking about how it's going to have to be quite drastic, and we've seen their plans to send people to Rwanda, which has really rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. Prince Charles saying that really isn't the way to go about it. So it's going to be interesting to see what their next move is. And something does need to be done, because at the moment this current situation we're in isn't working at all, and she's under increasing pressure to come up with something. She is the Home Secretary, it is her job to do something now, but I think she probably needs to work with the French, as opposed to so far over the last few years with Boris Johnson's government especially, working with the French is not really something that's happened. It's been a blame game, it's been pointing the finger at them, saying it's their, it needs to be a shared partnership, I think, to try and get these numbers down, because 40,000 people so far in 2022, which is double what it was in 2021, if this continues, then it's going to be a bigger and bigger problem.
Yes, it's been described as inhumane, so hopefully the government will resolve the issue urgently. Well, let's stay with this topic, looking at some of the headwinds facing Rishi Sunak's new government, and more specifically the Home Office, as the government faces legal action over conditions at the Manston Migrant Processing Centre. Campaigners have described the conditions there as inhumane. Earlier, I was joined in the studio by activist Sharifa Energy for her assessment on this developing story. Sharifa Energy, it's an absolute pleasure to have you in the Channels TV studios. Of course, the Home Office is under immense scrutiny this week, particularly the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, for her choice of language, saying that the migrant crisis is an invasion of British borders. Let's start with that, the kind of sentiment that's been stirred up by the right side of the Conservative Party. How does that make you feel?
I think it was absolutely appalling to use that sort of language as invasion. Just again, the dehumanising language that's used to refer to migrants, asylum seekers, refugees. It's been an ongoing thing since even David Cameron, referring to refugees as like swarms. And and I think it was even worse on the basis of the fact that a migrant centre in Dover had been petrol bomb attacked by a right-wing fascist. That in itself was completely appalling, instead of taking responsibility or showing more concern about whether, are the asylum seekers, are they safe? Are they being looked after? Already coming from a traumatised place, like when they've had to survive the sea, and then coming here to this completely hostile environment that's just been growing in the last 10 years of like the Tories being in power.
Surely, especially because it is such a dangerous crossing, Britain cannot continue allowing migrants to keep coming into this country via that way, because number one, it's dangerous, and number two, it just cannot be an open border policy. There's no country in the world that would just open up their borders to everybody. How do you think the government should tackle this? Someone
like Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, they've got a backlog of asylum seeker cases that they're behind on. It's not about an influx of, like mass crisis.
The invasion that they described. Yeah.
Like, I can't blame, if I've not done my work, I can't blame everybody else when I'm the one who's falling behind, and if I'm not fit for the job. Just humble yourself, and literally, Suella Braverman, you're not fit for the job.
Are you calling on the Home Secretary's resignation?
Of course. I think she's definitely not suited for the job. She's,
Would you say she's racist?
Yeah, she's racist, and I don't believe there's this idea of the fact that brown people can't be racist.
Yeah.
If you have, like, she's very colonised in her way of thinking, She's trying to get to the top to appease like white Tory society. She's not here to represent any type of migrant communities or anything. And you know, she's an enemy to migrant communities, and I don't think it's healthy at all. How can you be a Home Secretary when you don't care about the people that are vulnerable, that are traumatised and need love and care right now?
What needs to be done now is for this urgent situation to be tackled. Sharifa, energy, activist and poet, thank you so much for your wisdom today.
Thank you.
Let's change gears now and cast our minds back to President Muhammadu Buhari's official visit to Seoul, South Korea. According to the federal government, the main purpose of this visit was to participate in a World Health Organization summit focusing on vaccines. But on the sidelines, a series of key high-level business discourse took place as part of efforts to expand the budding trade relationship between both nations, which as of June this year is valued at over $1.5 billion US. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Ambassador Akinremi Bolaji, the Director of Economic Trade and Investment at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Your Excellency, Ambassador Akinremi Bolaji, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Nigeria has suddenly become South Korea's largest trading partner in Africa, with trade volumes, according to the data that I just looked at, hitting a reported $1.5 billion US as at June 2022. What is the mutual interest between both countries?
Yeah, thank you so much, first and foremost, Juliana. And thank you, channels, for having me this morning. Indeed, Nigeria and South Korea have come a long way. We both have a history of subjugation and freedom, and we've been trading partners for decades. And Nigeria, being the largest economy in Africa, is also the largest Africa trading partner with South Korea. And this is because Nigeria is trying to diversify its economy, and South Korea is also trying to increase in services and other automobile, electronics, and other activities into the Nigerian economy. So we both have mutual interest of development and growth, of collaboration, even beyond trade, on other fora, coming together, even in the multilateral setting, and our bilateral relations are very extremely cordial.
Thank you for that, Your Excellency, because I know there was some confusion within Nigeria about why the president was in South Korea. And I think that's because the headline said it was for a World Health Organization event at a time when there is so much turmoil within the borders, particularly when it comes to climate change and the recent flooding. But I know, and I have seen, that you were at several of these key sideline business meetings. But it's not just South Korea, is it, that Nigeria has interest in? Nigeria has interest in the whole of the Asia-Pacific region. So
if you look at Nigeria and, for example, Indonesia, we've just had a trade and investment forum between Nigeria and Indonesia, in which the Vice President was gave the keynote address. We have a trade balance of about 2 billion as that's the close of 2021, and we are expecting that by the close of 2022 to be about 3 billion, and by 2024 we are aspiring to about 4 billion. Hardly do we have other countries where we have such, even in Africa. So as we are aspiring to reach out to our fellow African countries in preparation for after, of course, Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement has kicked off, and we are also preparing to ensure that Nigeria is not just a receiving country of goods produced in other climes outside of Africa and dumped on Nigeria. We must prepare ourselves into production. We must prepare ourselves to ensure that we have access to required requisite technology, and so that we can develop our agro-allied industry, and so that our services also can be accepted in those countries.
We have run out of time, which is such a shame, because we could go on and on. But for now, Your Excellency, Ambassador Akinremi Bolaji, the Director of Economic Trade and Investment at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much for your time and your sound wisdom today. Coming up on Channel's Business Global, I'll be speaking about what Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party leadership victory could spell for British-India relations with Kunal Sahini, the CEO of Kalkai Media, and Irene Ochem, the founder and CEO of the African Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum, will be joining me from Tangier, Morocco, to discuss the measurable impact following the rise of female-led business summits on the continent. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be speaking with the CEO of Kalkai Media, Kunal Sahini, regarding India's reaction to Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister. But until then, here's a breakdown of the biggest business news stories of the week. The price of wheat and corn rose sharply at the start of the week after Russia announced it was suspending its participation in an agreement that has allowed Ukrainian grain export for months. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who helped broker the agreement, has said that he remains committed to the deal. There are concerns that the latest setback could further fuel food inflation and deepen the risk of shortages and famine. BP has reported robust underlying profit for the 3 months to the end of September, as a strong performance in natural gas trading offset weaker refining margins. The London-based oil and gas giant said third quarter profits came in at $8.2 billion, much higher than the $3.3 billion it reported a year earlier. Ocado, the British online supermarket and technology group, has signed an exclusive partnership deal with the South Korean firm Lotte Shopping Co. to develop the retailer's online grocery business. The deal will see both firms create a network of robotic warehouses across South Korea. Lotte Shopping is part of the Lotte Group, which is one of the biggest business conglomerates in the country. Its interests span retail, food, hotel and chemicals, with a total annual revenue of £9.5 billion. Shares in the FTSE 100 firm jumped 18.5% following the announcement. Now to our next story. Rishi Sunak's domestic honeymoon period may have ended abruptly, but the celebrations outside of the country remain. By becoming Britain's first Prime Minister of Indian descent, the 42-year-old has shattered a once impenetrable glass ceiling. India was once part of a British empire that stretched so far across the globe, it was often said the sun would never set on it. But 75 years on, times have certainly changed. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Kunal Sahini, an entrepreneur and the CEO and founder of Kalkai Media. Kunal joins me from Sydney, Australia. Kunal Sahini, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global, especially from the other side of the world. I think you're our first guest, actually, joining us from Sydney. We spoke about Rishi Sunak potentially becoming Prime Minister when you were in our studios a couple of weeks ago. It's happened. What is your initial assessment or response to that monumental appointment?
So, Juliana, I was in London about 10 days back when I was having this conversation with you. And it happened, and it was Diwali, which is a huge Indian festival. And I think it's a Diwali gift to the UK because Rishi coming from an Indian background, so I think British Asian, I should say, the first British Asian Prime Minister in the UK. I think there's a huge happiness in the British Asian community and overall in the Indian community worldwide that Rishi has, got the job, which we believe that he deserved in the first place anyways. And I think he's the right man for the job with all his experience and education from Oxford to Stanford and then being a treasurer, being an MP. So I think he's really the right man to lead the UK.
Yeah, I've got to tell you, whatever your politics, especially, anyone of colour in this country was celebrating. And yes, as you said, on Diwali of all days, certainly a gift. Kunal, he's only 42 years old. Can you believe it? What a marvellous achievement. Can you talk to me a little bit about what the reaction has been in India? Because yes, he is Indian, but of course we know he is extremely rich, and there can sometimes be, well, we know there is a huge division between the rich and the poor, but would you say on the whole it's been just completely positive?
I would say it is completely positive, Juliana, as you know, that when I was in the UK, so Calkine runs businesses in UK, in India, in Australia, in Canada, in US. So I meet a number of people of Indian origin all over the world. And yes, the experience has been very positive. People really love that a person of Indian origin has got the job to be a prime minister in the UK. But as you said, it is very important whether it is people of African origin, people of Indian origin, people of Asian origin in the UK. I think it's a great step forward where someone at number 10 was seen lighting Diwali lights or Diwali diyas or Diwali lamps, as we call them. So I think it's a great change for the UK to see someone of color, as you just said, becoming the prime minister. But more importantly, I think it's really important to say, just like Barack Obama deserved the job in the US, I think Rishi deserves the job, not just because he's a man of color, but because of his background in education, because of having run the Treasury. I think he has got that right experience to get the UK out of the downturn that it is currently in.
Kunal Sahini, entrepreneur, financial professional, CEO and founder of Calkine Media. Thank you so much for joining us so late in the day in Sydney, Australia. Thank you, Kunal. Now to our final story. The African Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum was recently held in Cairo with an aim of closing the gender gap by driving women's business leadership and entrepreneurship on the continent. According to data compiled by UNESCO, access to startup finance was the most identified barrier impacting women in Africa, but the tide is certainly shifting. For more on this, I'm now being joined by Irene Ochem, the founder and CEO of AWIEF. Irene joins me from Tangier, Morocco. Irene Ochem, thank you so much for taking time out to speak with me today. I've got to tell you, over the past couple of years, we are seeing a lot more female-led platforms, female-led discourse, particularly concerning economics and business, taking place on the continent. But an important question is the dialogue and the policy suggestions that are being discussed in these forums, trickling down and actually impacting real women living in Africa.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here with you to share insights. To answer your questions, yes, absolutely. In recent years, we are beginning to see more women-led business summits taking place around the continent, discussions. And at AWIF, the Africa Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum, what we do, one of the things we do is actually hosting an annual conference every year. And the objectives are, quite a couple of them. And some of them are that they help to increase awareness and create a more informed understanding of the opportunities, the challenges, and the approaches to women empowerment. And the result is we get is an attention and resources that are directed towards supporting women innovators and entrepreneurs at all levels of the African society. It's also an opportunity to spur African women to greater heights, in becoming more economically influential in addressing the issues that stand in their way. We also use the opportunity to celebrate and showcase successful women entrepreneurs and professionals in key sectors of the African economy as role models, and they are inspirers of other women, and they help to stimulate, motivate other women to unleash their potentials and to reach and exceed their goals. We also bring together the whole ecosystem, stakeholders, in various intermediaries such as governments who make policies that affect women, development partners who want to, dedicate resources and attention to women's economic empowerment, the media like yourself, and then the entrepreneurs themselves. So it's bringing all stakeholders together, to share ideas, good practices in the area of promoting empowerment, innovation, and entrepreneurship for women. So we are mobilizing African stakeholders, global media attention to the challenges and strategic responses for women entrepreneurship in Africa. So I think, yes, absolutely, they are necessary. They are happening. Our annual conference every year, since the past 8 years, we have achieved a lot, if not that awareness, but actually bringing intermediaries together, to discuss gender-specific constraints faced by African women innovators and entrepreneurs.
Irene Ochem, the founder and CEO of the African Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum. Thank you so much, Irene. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.